Hello, and welcome to the debut episode of the Black Swan Podcast. You might think, not another podcast. It's true, there are so many out there. So what makes ours different? Well, for a start, it's going to be a sharp and engaging video podcast with an audio alternative per episode. The episodes will likely be around 30 minutes each and will feature a unique lineup of speakers, from entrepreneurs to filmmakers to marketers to people fighting for good causes and beyond. For our debut episode, we are kicking off with the Head of Strategic Communications for Public Health within NHS Wales, Scott Wilson-Evans. We first worked with Scott when we produced a campaign video for NHS Wales looking at the health inequalities across Gwent. In this episode, we discuss Scott's journey into marketing and delve into conversations around effective marketing and brand growth. We hope you enjoyed the episode and feel free to skip to any section that interests you the most using the timecodes below. Can you introduce who you are and where you work?
Absolutely. So I'm Scott Wilson-Evans, and I'm currently Head of Strategic Communications for Public Health in NHS Wales, specifically in Nottingham University Health Board, which is in the Gwent area.
And how long have you been in that role?
So I've been in this role coming up to 3 years, but NHS Wales for nearly 5 years. So before this role, I was the National Communications Manager for Urgent and Emergency Care during the dreaded COVID. And then that role kind of took me into a local role in Gwent, and it's a much more different role to what I was doing. It's not to say less crisis sort of comms campaigning, but it's a lot more about sort of prevention and helping people live longer.
Okay, great. So can you tell us about your professional journey and what led to your current role?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of people were shocked to hear that actually by professional trade I'm actually a dancer. So way back when I left school at the age of 16, I had two options, which I came away with. One was business, the business studies, or dance. And I took the dance route. I spent a few years then doing a variety of stuff, including training, going on tours.
Why did you take the dance route?
The dance route at the time, I mean, I wasn't a very academic person when I left school. And dance was something that I was just able to do. It was natural to me. It was comfortable. And I wasn't quite sure long-term where I kind of wanted to go. And actually, dance took me around the world. I've been really lucky. I've worked on cruise ships. I've worked on show tours. It's been a really interesting time. It really kind of made me kind of who I am, my sort of values and stuff. And then in terms of sort of my step away from dance then into kind of sort of marketing, my key interest was leisure. So all those background of sort of traveling around, I was actually wanting to kind of go more down the leisure route originally. Whether that be go and do some more work with Disney or anything from that kind of view. So that the comms and the marketing side kind of came out of the blue because in between dance contracts, you got to keep the money coming in. So I was doing a lot of teaching, a lot of contract work, and we'll be teaching fitness classes. And this was probably the first generation of fitness instructors and dance instructors that, were actually using targeted digital marketing and paid for marketing to reach their audience. And that was my first foot into the market, where other instructors were still advertising on roundabouts and railings with their banners. This was a much more sort of targeted approach, and that was kind of my first kind of step into marketing. And it was really, really interesting because we built a model where, we had a 6-week course. We would specifically think about the audience we're going for, what motivation they would have to kind of come in and take that 6-week course up, and then how we then use a variety of digital assets then to engage them in. So that was kind of the step in from there. I then went to university a lot later than most because a lot of my friends were doing college and university. They were, the usual sort of method there, but I didn't do that. I did my traveling first. And my degree was actually in leisure marketing. Initially, that's where I went back in Swansea. It's brought me to Wales. And following on from that, I did a variety of stuff. I worked in leisure for a while. I worked for Bourne Leisure in water sports, in sort of leisure attraction management, which was really exciting. I then went to private sector. Okay. And this is where I really sort of honed in on my behavioural marketing experience, because actually I found myself in a role with a very large marketing budget. And I learned a variety of new stuff. I started off in the social media and the paid for advertising and the PPC sort of area. I then moved into television advertising, and this was a whole kind of new world of excitement because actually suddenly we're working with celebrity voices and faces, where we're working to really land people to purchase a product. And it was really, really exciting because we were doing split testing. We were doing, so much to increase our sales and our revenue. And it was a fascinating time. Following on from that, I left to go into agencies, a PR agency, and I'd worked for lots of great agencies across Wales during my time in private sector. And there we were able to do, it was more campaigning than marketing, so we moved more into the comms remit. And we did everything from Welsh Government campaigns, Public Health Wales, adoption, fostering. It was a really, really great time. COVID then hit. Everyone's got a COVID story, which is really, really interesting. And one of my my clients at the time was NHS, and it was around the urgent and emergency care route. And a fun fact I will share with people is my husband at the time was a doctor, is still a doctor, but he was in one of the emergency departments in Wales, and I was in this kind of urgent and emergency sort of comms role. So it was a really interesting balance during COVID. And it was a really fascinating, it was a tough time. Really, really tough time to be joining the NHS, and actually a time where communication was vital because we couldn't get it out quick enough. And then following on from that, I got really interested in prevention. Prevention's about actually supporting people to just live well, so they don't need to rely on the NHS so much, taking better care of themselves and their families, making sure they've got everything that they need. And this role has really, really evolved. We cover so many sort of different areas. There's a lot of crisis communication involved, a lot of response work required in the health protection remit. And I think to work in communications, you've got to have a bit of a fire in your belly around crisis, and we live for it because actually a lot of people don't really quite understand the communications and the marketing function around crisis, but it's generally at the heart of how you sort of deal and cope and manage, and also sort of there's a bit of a reputational management sort of thing in there as well. So there's a bit of a long journey from ballet dancer through into a head of comms, but it's been fun.
That's great. So you spoke about your core values. So how do they generally guide what you do personally and professionally? How do they influence your approach to marketing and leadership?
Absolutely. My core values have grown over time. So I'm a registered member with CIPR, Chartered Institute of Public Relations, and as a chartered member, we have certain values that we kind of adhere to. And actually, I didn't need to sign up for them because they were already kind of there. And the key bit for us is ethics, strategy, and leadership. Ethics being probably the number one, because during my career, probably more in my sort of private sector time, I've probably been exposed to a number of situations where PR or communications or marketing have kind of contributed towards improving the reputation of practice.
Right.
And upon reflection at the time, probably enabled a bit of greenwashing here and there without really understanding what that was. Actually, I've learned a lot more about greenwashing in the last 4 years.
Do you think it's a big issue now?
I think it's a continuing issue. I really, really do. And I actually think I'd recommend to anyone in communications and marketing to really just take a step back and understand greenwashing, because I did it as part of my chartership exams a few years ago, and it really made me reflect. Because in an organization, it all depends where the communication and the PR function sits. So in a lot of organizations, it can be quite operational. A lot of people's view of marketing communications is getting a message out. What a lot of people don't do is think, actually, I need communications at board level, or I need it at senior level, and I need them as part of our decision making, because a lot of the time greenwashing will happen, and this is maybe my observation, in an organization when you've got things being discussed maybe at a board level, and they're trying to solve a situation without the input of communications, PR or marketing in there. And sometimes that means that comms is then used as a tool to almost greenwash, as opposed to stepping back and saying, actually, is this right? Are we doing this? Is this correct? Because that's what we do. As a function, as a strategic level, we challenge. And actually, if I'm going in to manage a crisis, a situation, the first thing I want to know is, okay, are we? And that can be quite hard, actually, at times, for an organization to sit back and say, Yeah, actually we are, because certainly that's a different conversation. It's not a case of greenwashing. That's a case of, well, okay, how do we actually look at the core of our organisation, go back to our values? How do we actually look at the root of this problem, as opposed to just popping a band-aid on what is probably a very big issue?
Right. No, that's fantastic. So we'll go on now to ask some questions about sort of marketing and brand. So how do you ensure a distinctive brand voice for the NHS Wales brand?
So the NHS Wales brand is forever evolving. And I mean, the NHS recently celebrated 76 years, I think it was this year, which is really, really exciting. And I'm very lucky in my role because I am widely across the organisation, our different divisions, and I've really learnt how the NHS has evolved over time. The one thing I will say is the voice, the look, the feel. We've got some work to do there, because if we want to connect with future generations, to put health on their agenda, we've got to probably be doing some work yesterday. And actually, health, a lot of people, health isn't something for unless it's a problem. It's about proactively getting into people's minds. So from a brand and a marketing perspective, there are certain things that data will tell you right now that we've got high cancer rates, possibly from smoking or a variety of other stuff in some of our more mid to older generations. Although we want to treat and support those individuals, I actually believe there's a generational break that needs to happen, because we've got to speak to this is about prevention in the future. This is about prevention to those younger generations, whether it be not taking up smoking, thinking about alcohol consumption, thinking about their general sort of what healthy means to them. And as a brand as NHS, well, how do we get to communicate with younger people? And I do believe, I mean, I've had a few campaigns myself where we've worked really hard in that remit, because the NHS is naturally set up in a much more traditional style. You know, we're still communicating via letters. We're still in areas communicating paper. You know, there are certain things where for a young person, I would say a young person 18 years and under, that wouldn't be natural for them. That's not how we communicate. So again, from a brand and a marketing perspective, how do we make ourselves relevant for the future? And actually, that will never stop. We'll never reach a point where we say, we've got it right, we'll stop there. We've got to have the communications and the engagement functions continuously working to keep, chipping away at that and keep relevant. And actually, the workforce is changing in the NHS. So, you've got people that may have been a nurse for decades. You've got people that have been in varying other roles for a long time. We're starting now to get the newer generation of workforce in who have different ways of working, different values to what other people may have. And it's about how does the NHS as a whole continue to move forward, and how we actually market health. I mean, we see in the news around the finances of the NHS and a lot of struggles with waiting lists and a variety of other things there. So actually, we've got a lot of work to do to really put health at the forefront of young people. And my honest answer from a marketing perspective, that needs to be done with and for young people. I mean, I'm 33. I like to think that I'm down with the kids. I kind of know what we don't. And actually, I've got people in my team probably in their mid-20s, also in the same area. There's almost an element here of co-production, and actually how we bring young people in to guide us, because I think that the strongest of marketing professionals can hold their hands up and say, this is not my area. I can't advise here, but we're going to go find the right people that can. That's leadership. We can't be afraid to do that.
Okay, no, that's great. So what practical steps, I suppose, do you take to evolve the brand's identity whilst also remaining true to the core values?
Absolutely. I'll give you an example of a campaign because it really challenged the status quo. I'm really proud of it. It was really tough. So a couple of years ago, when I first came into this role, our sexual health services in Gwent were going through an engagement to almost do a bit of a restructure about how we deliver sexual health services in Gwent, and that was going to have a bit of an impact on younger people. And this was an opportunity to really not just step forward as the NHS, but leap forward. So we carried out our engagement. We spoke to our communities. We got to understand their thoughts in terms of what this restructure would look like. From a marketing perspective, I was gearing up an agency who were very, very young, very out there. And it was almost crossing into that kind of territory of, oh my God, where is this going to go? And we started to work with young people, began in co-production, to kind of understand how they talk about sex, how they talk about, staying safe, sexual well-being, all these sort of things that are important to young people. Because best will in the world, my experience of sexual education back when I was in school is going to be very, very different from today. So we did that understanding. We also tested out a variety of visual concepts, iconography, typography, colours, we did it all. And it was a really exciting time. So the agency went away and they built this brand. And I will be honest, what we ended up with was probably a slightly scaled down version because we went to the extreme, which I loved. But obviously being the NHS, you've got to kind of bring it back. Now, during this whole sort of campaign, this is probably the first communications campaign that went to board level.
Oh, wow. Because
what we were doing, some would say, was risk. It was risky. We were about to take a topic that's, let's face it, a bit of a taboo. It's our young people sexual health service. And it was met with, at board level, I will say it was the first time I'd experienced in my role that actually they said, you are the experts. We will take your advice. And that was wonderful. That was wonderful to hear because actually there have been times in my career where we've had to really fight and advocate for our profession. So that was great. We had the board backing there. We tweaked accordingly. And again, I'd love for the world to see some of those first visuals, but we won't. So we tweaked, we varied. We then went to launch. And the campaign landed. We went to Fresh Affair events, again, right in the heart of young people, their college sort of ages. And people loved it. Now, I won't hide the fact that we got some complaints, but actually we were prepared for that because I think when you go out there in marketing, if you are not prepared to push the boundaries of marketing, push the boundaries of what is an institution, the NHS has been here for a long time, we will never drive change. We will never support our younger generations to take health seriously. And actually, we changed how people in Gwent talked about sex. For the first time, we were talking about sexual well-being. We were talking about taking care of yourself and your sexual well-being. And it took time. This was a behavior change piece. It took time as we worked with professionals, with partners to really land this. But I will be honest, the majority of the reaction was positive. People, and we won an award from the Community Health Council, which is now CLICE, for the work that we did around that. And I was really proud of that because it was the first time in the NHS in my time there, we took that leap and it was a risk. And I'll never shy away from the fact it was risky. But actually, it got young people thinking about sex in a way that is safe, that works for them. And we communicated in a way that's relevant to them.
So how did you stay true to the core values whilst doing that?
So there's a lot of things. At the end of the day, we've got to remember, aside from the brand visual, what is our service? So actually, there's a variety of stuff in that. You have the contraception side of the service. You've got the sexually transmitted infections and the screening side of the service. We also have to make sure as an NHS, like I said, those original assets that we created, which again, were brilliant. It was about thinking, okay, let's take this back to the NHS brand, this well-respected 76-year-old brand.
So how do you do that?
We have a collective conversation. So the fact that it went to board level, you've got basically the guardians of the Nottingham Bevan University Health Board there at exec level, and getting their thoughts, their input, and people. You can see people were enjoying actually having this conversation, and we want people to challenge us. Although we're bringing this concept, this very new concept, we want people to turn around and say, "But have you thought about this? What about the implications here?" What we are not in this, although we're the strategic experts around communications and marketing, you have to bounce that around your different areas of the organisation to get that input, because that's how we build something that is fit for young people, but also fit for the organisation. So we looked at some of the brand visuals. So I'll share with you on, we went for a bit of a doodle approach and some of the things that we did. We started off initially with, and I'll share it with you, it was penises and vaginas, because the designer was his first day on the job at this agency, and that was the first thing he did, and he was blown away by that. So what we actually did is we went from that risque level and we toned it back to emojis. Emojis are, it looks like an emoji. It was much more peaches, aubergines, that kind of approach. It was very tongue-in-cheek, and it was those sort of things that we brought it back. We thought, let's be appropriate here. Sure. So again, it's thinking about that. The way we land the messages as well. Like I said, we got some views in, some complaints. We got some people questioning the campaign, and we actually approached the campaign knowing that that's probably going to be a possibility, sure. And we were ready for that because we have to be able to defend what we're trying to do here. And actually, there's nothing we're doing there that's outside of the law. If anything, we are trying to promote safety in a way that is meaningful to that our audience, and that is marketing. Yeah. That really, really is. And then the other side of the values is, well, we had to kind of think, well, how does this really colourful young brand come into the NHS and our very corporate look and feel? So we did a bit of work around the rebranding of the actual service itself, which ended up being the sexual education community service, sex. Yeah. And we built them their own brand that dovetailed this new bright approach, while also bringing in some of that corporate look and feel, and it ended up with quite a nice balance. Nice. And actually, taking that tongue-in-cheek approach as well, because there were other names on the table we didn't go with, but it worked. And do you know what? It's an art; it's not a science, sure. So you won't always get it right. But I think it's important that you push the boundaries to try at least.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking about pushing the boundaries, then, can you give us an example of an emotional campaign that really landed, and how would you go about sort of approaching something that is emotional, because that could be controversial as well?
Absolutely. In my nearly 5 years in the NHS, there's been a number of times where we've probably really had to connect with our audience. I'll give you two examples. Give you a COVID example. We don't often talk about COVID much anymore, so we're trying to sort of move on forward. But I'll share an example with you I was thinking about in the car journey.
It did change a lot though as well, COVID.
It absolutely did. It's changed the ways of how we work. But I was in the car here, and I thought about a time where actually I was behind a camera on something and really in tears myself. So you remember at the point of COVID, we were all staying home. Yeah. We were probably having our 10 minutes of exercise day, whatever that was. Our loved ones, whoever may have been on the front line, were in. It was a really tense time. Yeah. And then the vaccine appeared, this glimmer of hope, and I think we were a little while into COVID before we got to that point. And I remember at the time I was at Cumbrand Stadium, which I can say now because it made the news anyway. So we had media teams from across the world geared up, ready to film this first vaccine, as it were, and us open this centre. And before we opened the doors at Cumbrand, we had these rows of all the vaccination tables where we had all of our clinicians. And I was up on the balcony, and we were getting a photo shot for the media of all of our clinicians stood arms in sort of thing in their lines. I remember crying. I remember thinking to myself, gosh, this is you knew you were part of something in history. Yeah. You knew you were part of something that people would talk about for a long time. And that picture was on BBC News by, I think, lunchtime that day, which was good. So that side was great. But we then had to connect with our public. And at the time, I mean, we lost people. We lost friends in the NHS, which was really, really tough to COVID. And it was this beacon of hope. And we had some work to do to connect with the public. Now, you only have to Google the COVID-19 vaccine to see some of the hesitancy. And it was a really tough one because, people had views. Yeah. The mis and disinformation was a real problem at the time. Yeah. And at the end of this was a new vaccine. Yeah. So there's a lot of work we had to do to campaign there. And we really utilised our trusted voices. I mean, communications, PR, marketing, its power comes from its people. It is people influencing people and listening. Sure. So you've got to use that. So within our campaigns, if I remember the day, we had Amy Jones, who was one of our absolute power voices in Wales during COVID. And she did a phenomenal job every time she went in front of a camera and told it as it was. And we had her interviewed. Actually came to have a COVID vaccine that day. We had her interviewed. And people listen to our clinicians because actually they're very well respected. And that was the campaign approach where we really had to connect. And they did. But it's about multiple voices, whether it be our doctors, our nurses. There's a lot of ways we can kind of go with that.
In terms of how they connected, is there anything you did in terms of tone of voice, anything in particular?
Absolutely. So when you're ever going to interview, obviously from a media perspective, we're always trying to brief our spokespeople the best we can. It's not necessarily about giving them their words. We don't want to do that. We want to guide them. The one thing I try and do in that perspective is give them what we're trying to achieve today and actually give them the background of where the public are at right now. I think it's really important there to get that across.
So what strategies do you tend to use to create an emotional connection with an audience?
I think step one, you have to understand your audience. And this is where strategic communications planning comes in, because you have to start with your data. You've got to understand what the problem is we're actually trying to address and take it right back to there. A lot of people start planning in the middle, which is usually the content space. But, go back to the data. What is it I'm trying to achieve? What is it the data's telling me? What's the problem? What's the challenge? And more important, what's the audience? From there, you've got to understand your audience. You've got to actually, that's your insight gathering stage, is, okay, who are they? What is their connection to this problem? What is their motivations to solve? What is their challenges, their barriers? Yeah. And more importantly, how do they like to be communicated with? Because this is where communication advice really needs to be stronger. I've noticed across organizations, this is the area. Anyone with a Facebook profile thinks they can do comms and marketing, but actually there's a specialist side of it that we have to do to actually push through from data into insight into connectivity. Yeah. Following on from that, I am always a big believer in talking to that audience. In marketing, we do split messaging, test messaging. I think it's important to not just go out with one, that's the message, that's what we're going to go with. Test. Really break it down and think, actually, does this land better? Speak to that audience. And when you go to sort of launch whatever that may be, for us it could be a vaccination campaign, it could be health improvement, it could be anything. Sure. Don't be afraid to go back through your cycle and think, has this worked? Actually, have I connected? What has the engagement been? What's the reaction been? And put yourself back through the cycle, because we should always be wanting to continuously improve. Sure. And actually, if you're going for behavior change, which most of the time we are, in a health improvement or a health protection kind of way, you've really got to understand, have I shifted using their motivations there against the problem? Where's the behavior now? A lot of people, because we're usually up against time, we'll do the first bit of the cycle, they'll get that message out, they've moved on to the next problem. Right. And that's the nature, unfortunately, of a lot of people's work. It's actually saying to yourself, it doesn't end here. So actually, what's the data now telling me? Yeah. Is that problem now this instead of that? What are the audience connect? It's pushing yourself back through, because you can't just change it after one thing. And in marketing, we talk about multiple touchpoint marketing. Yeah. We talk about actually connection. Have we actually managed to connect on the first try there? Is there a different way we're going to sort of get by? I mean, our smoking help me quit service, for example. Working with our national bodies, Public Health Wales and the Health Board, we do multi-touchpoint marketing, because actually sometimes it's nudge theory. You've got to nudge people to actually take the action that you want them to.
Sure. So Scott, I'd like to talk a little bit about the sort of benefits of video production, perhaps, especially with when you spoke earlier about sort of appealing to a younger target audience. I know we did a campaign before, which was quite an emotional campaign in terms of what it was looking to achieve. So what role does video production have in your campaigns?
Video is huge, and actually it's important. And video's evolved for us a lot over the last few years, because actually platforms like TikTok have come online, and the way that people interact with video has changed. Social media use has changed. So actually, what it's made us think as an institution, an NHS health body, is how do we create our videos, whether it be with our partners, our agencies, or our team there, that kind of land and resonate. And like anything, when you approach a PR campaign, you usually have what we call a hero video. You have something in there that is quite short, but it connects with people. It invokes emotional response. So the video we worked on, Building a Fairer Gwent, we hooked that on the fact that, quite frankly, people were not living as long as they should. And that's outrage. That is... there was so much we can do there, but that was the reality in our communities, and we had to light a fire there. And the video was really important, because that was a whole system approach. That wasn't just health, that was local authorities, it was emergency services, it was us, of course, charity and third sector. This was about starting a movement. And you take it back to, what am I trying to achieve here? What's my challenge, my problem? What's my goal? And video is generally at the forefront of that. Likewise, we do stuff within the health board, whether it be TikTok videos. reels are such a valuable and straightforward piece of content for us to produce, but are quite powerful. And we balance between the more polished sort of stuff that we may present, like the Building Fair Gwent video was. Likewise, though, we'll also probably work with our clinicians or whoever that might be, topic-wise, to create what we call rough and ready. Hand them a phone, off you go sort of thing. We'll guide them. But actually, people connect with video. And it's about, like we said, people connect with people. It's the human stories, the trusted voices. I don't think there is a campaign out there where video is not a starting point for us. I think it's worth noting that video is what I call a high-value product. It can take a lot of time to produce and go and film. So sometimes you've also got to think, well, okay, what else can I produce around this campaign to continue to land that message? But we always start with video. And I think if anyone's in marketing, anyone's in comms and PR, it's a skill I'd recommend to anyone, get to really understand video and producing it and directing it.